Hey, hi, hello. Welcome to Diana Emerson. Today we're listening to Dark Case, crime number one.
Viewer discretion is advised for this educational documentary. Welcome or welcome back to Dark Case Documentaries. I bring you true crime, disturbing stories, and other things that you may later regret knowing with regular uploads every week. Please do join the quickly growing, incredibly supportive Dark Case family by hitting subscribe now and turning on notifications. Remember, choosing to be kind can save a life in many ways. Thank you so much for choosing to be here with me. Our love and respect goes out to those that knew and loved Sally Ann and all those affected by this case. Sally Ann Bowman was born on October the 5th, 1987 in Swindon. A star in the making, she was known for her warm personality and infectious smile. It was said she could light up any room she walked into. Bright and bubbly, Sally Ann loved the stage and performing for audiences. She could sing, she could dance, and she was accepted into the Brit School, a prestigious school for the performing arts. A school known for producing such stars as Adele and Amy Winehouse. Sally Ann was well on her way to hitting it big time, achieving her dreams. Standing at 6 feet tall with a slender frame and classically beautiful features, Sally Ann was also at the start of a successful modelling career. Even at the tender age of 18, when many of us have no idea what we want to do with our lives, she truly had everything going for her.
She was mainly in theatre at college at the start. And then she was doing dance, so she could act, she could dance, and as well as this, she could sing. Like, I never knew, while I was at Brit School for the 2 years she was there, I never knew that she could sing so well. And then one day I went to her house and she got a karaoke machine out, and I just remember her singing Stand By Your Man.
Sally's family was the centre of her world, and she cherished the time spent with them. But keen to get some independence, she had moved out of the family home and was renting a room in a shared house nearby. It wasn't anything grand, but it was hers, and she loved having her own space. On the 24th of September 2005, Sally Ann was at her mum's house. She'd spent her day relaxing before getting ready to hit the town with her older sister Nicole and her friends. At 6 p.m. she headed off, telling her mum she loved her as she walked down the driveway. Not wanting to travel into London, the women decided to spend their evening on Croydon High Street at Lloyd's Bar. It was a girls' night and they were letting their hair down. They were dancing, drinking and laughing. By 1 a.m, Sally Ann and her friends were all partied out. Just a quick note from me, the thought of partying for 7 hours now makes me realise how old I am. I actually can't imagine being able to do that. But back to the case. Jumping in a taxi, they headed back to Sally Ann's sister's house. But Sally Ann wasn't in the mood for an after party. She had gone through a breakup recently and it was playing on her mind. She'd been dating Lewis Sproston for 2 years on and off, and the two had called it quits a few weeks earlier. Soon after arriving, Sally Ann phoned Lewis, who was out in Kingston with his mates. She wasn't over him yet and invented a bogus story to get his attention. She told him that Sister Nicole had been arrested for fighting and she asked him for a lift home. He wasn't happy about leaving his friends, but he couldn't leave her stranded. He picked her up in his car at around 2:20 a.m. and began to drive her back towards Blenheim Avenue, where she rented her room. With the breakup fresh, emotions were running high. Quickly, the pair started bickering in the car. They argued about their relationship ending, both accusing each other of cheating. It was heated. This really is young love in action. The argument lasted for around 2 hours, and for Lewis, it's forever stamped in his memory. He said, "I thought she had been with boys that night and she thought I'd been with girls. It was just jealousy. There may have been raised voices, but not shouting. Nobody outside of the car would have heard it. We then made up, hugging and kissing. But Sally Ann didn't want me to leave and we started to argue. day. At around 4:15 a.m., Sally Ann got out of the car and Lewis drove off. He didn't know that this would be the last time he would see Sally Ann. A neighbour reported being woken up by the sound of a gargled noise followed by a scream. It didn't seem right, so they got out of bed. Looking out of the window, the street was still. There was now no other noise. No one was around. So they simply went back to bed. But 5 minutes later, unable to shake the sound of the screams, the same neighbour returned to the window, spotting a man walking down the street. But there was no one else in view. It was just one man walking, nothing untoward. They returned to bed, putting the harrowing noises down to foxes. Foxes are common in London. The next morning at around 6:30 a.m., something caught the eye of the same neighbour. Hidden just out of view behind a skip, they saw what looked to be the legs of a mannequin. Getting closer to investigate, they were met with a truly horrific sight. They said about that morning, "I put on my dressing gown and slippers and went across the road. I walked around the left side of the skip. I just felt I knew what I would see. I knelt just as a natural thing and said, 'Oh, poor darling.'" Mother Linda Bowman recalled hearing knocking at her front door. It was still early in the morning. She assumed it was Sally Ann, who must have been locked out. From what I could tell, this wouldn't have been the first time. We've all been there. But in a moment that must have been confusing, but then crushing, she instead was met by 3 police officers. It was then that the officer told her the horrifying news. Sally Ann would not be coming home. Mother Linda remembered screaming, she recalled. Just screaming, I couldn't believe it. My whole world fell apart. Her youngest daughter had been struck with a sharp implement until she was no longer breathing. Within hours of the investigation being launched, her sister and mother were faced with a terrible ordeal of identifying her body. Speaking about the experience, Mother Linda explained that she thought it was a cruel joke at first, saying, "I remember going into the room and for a split second, I thought it wasn't her because her hair was dark. And I just moved forward and saw her little button nose and freckles and knew that was it." 2 days after Sally Ann had been found, the family made the decision to learn more about what had happened. Stuart Cundy, the senior investigating officer, arrived at Linda's house to talk the family through what they knew so far. When the police were called on the night of the 25th of September, the quiet road was cordoned off. The police moved quickly as this shocking crime rocked the community. All eyes turned to Sally Ann's ex-boyfriend, Lewis. Lewis recounted the last moments he spent with her, saying, "I went to get into the car again, but she didn't want me to, and she grabbed my t-shirt, ripping my chain from my neck. After a couple of minutes, I got back into the car and locked the doors. Sally Ann picked up her handbag and I saw her walking away through the rearview mirror. The last thing I saw of Sally Ann was her entering her front garden." Lewis was arrested on the 26th of September, the following day. He was the last person to have seen her alive, and they had been fighting. His ripped shirt and broken necklace could very well be seen as signs of Sally Ann defending herself. His phone record showed him threatening to spit in her face if she'd been with another man earlier that evening. However, something wasn't quite adding up. There were no witnesses. There was no CCTV. They only had one piece of evidence on their side. The killer had left his DNA. The autopsy was performed quickly. Sally Ann had been jabbed with a sharp implement many times. But shockingly, she had also been bitten. Bite marks were found on her neck, chest, and cheek. Boyfriend Lewis's DNA wasn't a match, and he was released 4 days later without charge. The case was going cold. If Lewis wasn't responsible for ending Sally Ann, then who was? That fateful night in September had been a night out for many in the Croydon area. While Sally Ann drank in Lloyd's bar, another celebration was happening 2 miles down the road. Mark Dixie had just turned 35. He was a chef and had spent the night celebrating with friends at the Windsor Castle pub. It was a heavy night of drinking and he eventually left the pub at around 2:30 a.m, then returning to an after party on Avondale Road where he was left on the sofa downstairs, seemingly alone for the rest of the night. 9 months later, in June 2006, Mark Dixie was arrested following a bar brawl in Crawley. The England football team were playing. A lot of people were drunk. Things got out of hand and punches were thrown. The police were subsequently called. Police took DNA samples from everyone involved as they were taken into custody. It was only a minor assault, so when Mark Dixie began to sob as the custody officers checked him in, the officers were slightly confused, bemused even. But the reason for his emotional outburst was a sinister one, and it would soon become apparent to everyone. It took 2 further weeks for Mark Dixie's DNA sample to make its way through the system. These things just took longer back then. And shockingly, when the results finally came back, it was an exact match for the DNA found on Sally Ann Bowman. Mark Dixie was arrested on the 28th of June 2006. He pleaded not guilty and he went on trial at the Old Bailey in February 2008. During the trial, the jury heard how Dixie had indeed gone back to her house on Avondale Road on that fateful night. 3 weeks before Sally Ann's ending, Dixie was thrown out of his home he shared with his girlfriend and son. And on this very night, Dixie had tried to convince his girlfriend to take him back, but she refused. He had truly slept on the couch at his friend's house, but he had awoken in the early hours. He locked his friends in their bedroom so they wouldn't realise he'd left, and then he exited through the front door. Whether he stumbled upon Sally by chance or he had set out to commit a heinous crime, we'll never know. He told the court that he had violated Sally Ann, finding her unconscious. He claimed he was not responsible for her passing, but that he had taken advantage of the situation. He said that he only realised she wasn't alive when he bit her cheek. This defence was far-fetched, but it was the only one that he had. In my opinion, a totally shameless reach for an excuse to try and minimise what he did. He was relying on the fact that Sally Ann had gotten into a fight with Lewis before she passed, but the jury didn't believe him. It was also revealed that this wasn't Mark Dixie's first offence. It wasn't even his second. It was his 17th. When he was just 16, he violated a woman in her own car before tying her to the door and setting fire to the vehicle. Luckily, she escaped. Mark then went on to commit multiple crimes. In 1998, Dixie threatened a student in Australia with a bladed weapon before bludgeoning her. She survived to tell a tale and Dixie got off scot-free. Strangely, confusingly, he wasn't imprisoned. He wasn't placed on a register. Instead, he was ordered to pay a fine and then deported. A decision by Australian authorities that haunts Sally Ann's mum. She said, "We now know he was arrested at least 3 times in Australia, but he was deported without any warnings being issued by the authorities. They didn't do their job properly, and that is the reason my daughter's dead." The courts in the UK were less forgiving than Australia. Detective Superintendent Cundy said after the trial, "The public is protected from a truly dangerous killer. Sally Ann was a young woman who had her whole life ahead of her. Mark Dixie cut that life short in the most horrific way imaginable." On the 22nd of February 2008, he was found guilty after just 3 hours of deliberation by the jury. He was sentenced to a minimum of 34 years in prison, one of the longest minimum terms handed out in the United Kingdom at that time. On the 30th of October 1982, Jill Marr, then Jill McKeon, was born in Drogheda, Ireland. Jill was a small-town girl growing up in Termonfeckin, a village with less than 1,600 people. When her father, George, got a job in Australia, she moved to Perth with her parents and her brother, Michael. The new country wasn't a problem for Jill. She was a small town girl with a big personality. She was really bright, bubbly, and so gorgeous, said a school friend. She moved back to Ireland in 1996 to round off her education, graduating eventually from the University of Dublin with a Bachelor of Arts degree. Jill was going places. Anyone who knew her said so. Jill was always the life of the party, always had a smile on her face. She was always full of fun, always had something to say, and she was very intelligent. She met her husband Tom while at university, and the two relocated to Melbourne, Australia, Brunswick to be exact. Jill and Tom got a beautiful apartment on Lux Way. Life was going well. She became a unit coordinator for the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, or ABC. There she was considered a rising star. Despite a small 5'1" frame, Jill's personality packed a huge punch. She had a great group of friends at work, and they often took to the town for a few drinks after they finished. The night of September 21st, 2012 was no different. It was a Friday night. Jill had gone out with a few friends from ABC to the Brunswick Green Bar on Sydney Road. After staying there for a while, they moved on to Bar Etiquette, a short walk away. It was a good night. They let their hair down, drinks were flowing, and the group were in great spirits. As the night began to wind down, Jill decided to call it a night. She started walking back towards the flat on Lux Way that she shared with husband Tom at around 1:30 a.m. This should have been a 12-minute walk at most. She called her brother Michael on the phone as she walked. It was only a short call. They spoke about their dad. They spoke about what they could get him for his upcoming birthday. Neither of them were aware that this would be the last time that they would speak. Back at the flat, Tom suddenly woke up to realise that he was still alone. His wife was not by his side. Jill hadn't arrived home yet. Checking the time, it was now 4 a.m. And this just wasn't like Jill. Tom went out to search for his wife, but after checking everywhere he could think of and coming up short, he contacted the police. Jill was close to her family, and she was head over heels in love with her husband. She had great relationships with her friends. She wouldn't just stay out all night. Something wasn't right. As the news of her disappearance began to circulate, colleagues from ABC took to Twitter to get the news of her disappearance out. Friends, family and strangers began to put up posters around Brunswick. A Facebook page called Help Find Jill Maher was set up. Within just 5 days of the Facebook page being launched, it had received over 100,000 followers. On the 24th of September, a discovery was made. It was Jill's bag. It was found on Hope Street, just 7 minutes away from her home. After this discovery, the police weren't so sure that they were simply looking for a missing person anymore. To everyone's dismay, the case was handed over to homicide detectives. The very next day, officers had yet another breakthrough. An employee of the Duchess Boutique, a bridal store on Sydney Road, the same road where Jill and her friends had been that night, handed in some CCTV footage. The footage was less than ideal, largely obscured. It was filmed from inside of the shop, but it was still clear enough to change the course of the investigation in one fell swoop. In the footage, a man in a blue hoodie could be seen walking around suspiciously outside of the shop. The man could be identified as Caucasian. He looked like he was up to no good. 4 minutes later, the same man was back, but this time with Jill. She could be seen talking to him and showing him something on her mobile phone. This was the last known sighting of Jill Maher. With her phone clearly in her hand, police traced its movements that evening. In the footage, Jill is just a stone's throw away from her home, around 7 minutes. When the police tracked the phone's movement, triangulation shows her phone moving at speed down the freeway. So how does she get from a 7-minute walk away from her flat to being in a car hurtling down the freeway? Police used ANPR cameras to track down cars that are on the freeway at that time. Police then came to a horrifying discovery.
No barking. No barking.
The triangulation of the phone. A car registered to a well-known and dangerous offender. 6 days after Jill Maher vanished, the police made an arrest. On the 27th of September, Adrian Ernest Bailey, aged 41, was arrested at his home in Coburg for the intimate violation and ending of Jill Maher. He was taken into custody where he underwent hours of interviews and interrogation.
Around 2:30 this afternoon, police arrested a 41-year-old man in the suburb of Coburg. Now, that suburb is near the suburb of Brunswick. Now, he was taken here to the St Kilda Police Complex, has been questioned all afternoon and all evening. He hasn't yet been charged with any offence, but the expectation is that he will be charged over the disappearance of Jill Maher.
To the officer's surprise, Bailey confessed to everything. He recalled how he throttled Jill with his bare hands after violating her in a lane just off of Hope Street. 8 hours later at 10 p.m, he led officers to where her body had been left in a shallow grave on Black Hill Road. She was just weeks away from her 30th birthday. An amazing life cut tragically short.
The search for Jill Maher has come to a tragic end, with her body found in a shallow grave here in Gisborne South, about a 40-minute drive from where she was last seen in Sydney Road, Brunswick. She was buried several metres off a dirt road under a tall leafy tree. Homicide detectives of forensic police have spent several hours examining the scene. It's a very remote area, surrounded by paddocks and only accessible by dirt road.
There was another horrifying discovery. Ernest Bailey was on parole when he ended Jill's life. Shockingly, following his arrest, Ernest's solicitor requested a suppression order be in place. This was to ban the publishing of any potentially damaging material about him. The request was granted. The horrifying reasons for the suppression order became quickly apparent. Jill was not Adrian Bailey's first victim. His known crimes date back to 1990, when an 18-year-old Bailey violated a friend of his sister. Just 1 month later, he struck again, attempting to do the same to a girl 1 year younger than himself. 4 months later, he attempted to do it again to another girl he picked up hitchhiking. He was charged and sent to prison in 1991 for these offences, serving just 22 months of a 5-year sentence. He would later admit that he had cheated the system, simply going through the motions of rehabilitation. This man did not want to change. Officially, everyone believed he was no longer a danger to society, but he knew otherwise. And he admitted during a court appearance to forcing himself on another 5 women over a 6-month period in 2001. For this, he was jailed once more for 11 years, but again he served just 8 years of this sentence before being released in 2010. Clearly, he was a man set in his ways. When being interviewed following his crimes against Jill, he said, "I should be in jail anyway, you know. I shouldn't have been let out last time, simple. And I say that in the hope someone hears that and they don't ever let me out again. How many chances does a person need?" Shockingly, they really were his own words. At 2 a.m. on the 28th of September, Bailey was charged. An hour later, he had an out-of-session hearing that lasted for just 90 seconds. This time, there would be no bail. He was held on remand to await his trial. The gravity of the situation must have been weighing on Bailey. He tried to end his own life whilst in custody. There were still questions that Jill's husband, family and community needed to know. Why Jill? Why that night? Why did he carry out these actions in such a savage manner? He told a psychologist, Professor James Ogloff, that he had attempted to kiss and touch Jill outside of the Brunswick Lane bar. She didn't react the way that he wanted her to, or the way that he expected. Jill stepped back and slapped him across the face. But Bailey wasn't used to being told no. Her response had made his blood boil. He was now enraged. He saw red after she had rejected his advances. He dragged her into a nearby lane and forced himself on her. However, Jill was a fighter, and she knew she was just 400 metres from home. After the assault, she hit him with her mobile phone and threatened to call the police. Bailey, however, responded by throttling her until no longer breathing. He was in too deep and panicking. He drove home, collected a shovel, and then returned to the scene of the crime. He dragged her into his car and drove to Ginsburn South. Here, he dug a shallow grave and attempted to bury her. When the news broke about everything that had happened to Jill Meagher, the community was devastated. Shortly after the body was found, the Australian flag at the ABC's South Bank studios was flown at half-mast as a sign of respect. Part of a statement on the ABC website read, Jill was a much-loved member of the local radio family. She was witty, intelligent, and great company. Jill was an innocent victim, a young, vibrant woman with her whole life in front of her. There were visuals, marches, and thousands of bouquets of flowers. They were left both to offer condolences and to try and promote changes for a safer community. But the reaction wasn't all positive. After Bailey had been charged, various Facebook users began to create pages about the case. As some of them were openly hostile towards Bailey, the Victoria Police tried to unsuccessfully have them taken down. This was to prevent any potential jurors being impacted or swayed by social media coverage. Jill's husband Tom also backed these calls to have them removed. Chief Commander Ken Lay condemned Facebook for not taking down the post, saying, "When you see the hatred that's incited on some of these sites, it is very much the antithesis of what we saw yesterday with 30,000 people taking to the streets, saying, let's try and make this a safer and fairer community." On the 5th of April 2013, Bailey pleaded guilty. During a pre-sentence hearing, victim impact statements were read out. The devastation was immeasurable. Her widower Tom said, "What was stolen from us on September 22nd, 2012 was love, my best friend and my entire world. I think of the waste of a beautiful mind and a brilliant soul. I am half a person because of this crime." During this hearing, Bailey's lawyer said that he understood he deserved a life sentence and that he was remorseful. Prosecutors hit back, arguing that as he attempted to conceal the crime, this proved that he wasn't sorry for his actions. If he was sorry, would he have gone through the troubles of knowingly digging a shallow grave? During this hearing, the suppression order was also lifted, allowing for his extensive history of violence to be revealed. The courtroom at the Victoria Supreme Court was packed out. The public gallery was full. The media was in a full frenzy. Bailey's lawyer had tried to argue that Bailey had borderline personality disorder, that he was an alcoholic who had been intimately violated as a youth, but the judge was having none of it. When sentencing him, Justice Nettles said that Adrian Bailey was a deviant, and that he either ended Jill because she threatened to call the police after he assaulted her, or because the idea of snuffing her out was arousing. I quote, "You were larger and stronger than she, and you used that physical advantage to dominate her. In effect, you dragged her off the street late at night, while she was peacefully going about her business within a stone's throw of her home." Throughout his sentencing, Bailey stared down at the floor, only looking up once his sentence was handed down. For someone that was remorseful, he wasn't great at showing it. On the 19th of June 2013, Adrian Ernest Bailey was sentenced to life in prison with a non-parole period of 35 years. Following this high-profile case, Victoria's parole system underwent a massive overhaul. This was directly as a result of what happened to Jill. Dennis Napthine, Victoria's Premier, explained, "There is no doubt that the system failed Jill Meagher. Under the changes we've already introduced, the offender would have been back in jail, not on the streets. Our actions are the minimum we can do to try and make sure this never happens again." Sabrina Harouni was born on a Growing up in Gilbertsville, Sabrina was known by all for her kind heart and infectious smile. Her older sister Mariam described her as a gem, saying, "She was the heart of the family, she was the baby." But the baby of the family was growing up quickly and she had goals of earning her business degree. Sabrina had big plans for the future. Many of these plans included her boyfriend, Nicholas Foreman, a 23-year-old from Collegeville. She'd been dating Nicholas for around 7 months and she often stayed with him a few times a week at his rented room on Hamilton Road. She hadn't told her family about him yet, not even her sister. This was her little secret. It was the 3rd of February 2020, the day after the Super Bowl. It was a cold day in Pennsylvania. At Pottstown Hospital, an Uber speeds towards the emergency room. In the back of the car, Sabrina Harouni is unconscious. She is no longer breathing. Her boyfriend Nicholas holds her as she battles with life-threatening injuries. Sabrina is suffering from respiratory and cardiac arrest. She has bruising on her face and on her neck. There is dried blood coming from her nose. Her body is cold. The medical staff try frantically for nearly 2 hours to resuscitate her, but it's too late. Brenna Coyle was one of the nurses. She said, "We never had a pulse. She was never conscious in the emergency room." Sabrina Harouni, the baby of the family and the 22-year-old with her whole life to live, now was no longer alive. The police were called to the hospital straight away.
Sabrina Harouni, you will never be forgotten. It's a feeling like somebody took your heart out and just threw it away. I would do anything to go back and see her just one more time. She was the heart of our family. She was the baby, our angel. Your precious soul will live on until the end of time.
The victim was cold to the touch with blue lips and not breathing. County Detective John Wittenberger and State Police Trooper Richard W. Sanzik Jr. wrote in the arrest affidavit. Doctors told detectives Sabrina's body temperature was no more than 79 degrees and her pupils were blown out. The condition and injuries were consistent with a severe assault. Sabrina had been beaten, but the question was, by who? The police questioned boyfriend Nicholas Foreman. He was the last person to see her alive. After all, he had brought her into the hospital, so he must have had the answers. Nicholas told the Pottstown police that he and Sabrina had gone to the PJ Wellahans pub in Oaks on the 2nd of February. They'd gone to watch the Super Bowl. He said they'd been having a great time and were both in good spirits. At least they were, until Sabrina got into a verbal altercation with 3 females at the pub. There was arguing, there was shouting. Ultimately, Nicholas and Sabrina left to get an Uber home to his Perkiomen residence on Hamilton Road. But to their dismay, the 3 girls from the pub followed them there. They then jumped Sabrina. It was 3-on-1. Sabrina was badly beaten. Nicholas, though, said he was helpless. He couldn't get involved in the fight as he was already on probation for driving under the influence and resisting arrest. Nicholas also had past charges of disorderly conduct, criminal trespass and harassment in 2014. Therefore, if he got involved, things could get really bad for him. So he just watched on. After the fight with the 3 women was over, he carried Sabrina inside. She was injured, but she was still breathing. He checked on her until he fell asleep. At around 8:45 a.m. the next morning, Nicholas took an Uber to Limerick District Court. He had a preliminary court hearing for felony illicit substance charges. When he got back, he checked again on Sabrina. He tried to wake her up, but she wasn't coming round. For the second time that morning, he ordered an Uber. This time, he bundled his girlfriend's battered body into the back of the car and headed to the Pottstown Memorial Hospital. It was only a short drive and she was still breathing when they left. However, we know that she wouldn't be breathing for long. That was Nicholas's story, but something wasn't right. Nicholas wasn't worried about his girlfriend. In fact, he wasn't concerned at all after they arrived at the hospital. He was calm. He was just explaining how what he saw had happened. A Pottstown policeman explained, describing Nicholas's demeanour at the hospital. Nicholas never asked about Sabrina's condition either. He didn't ask about his girlfriend, who had been beaten to within an inch of her life. In fact, he seemed to forget that she'd been jumped at all. At some point, the story he was giving wasn't matching the information we were getting, explained the same police officer. But even when detectives pressed Foreman about whether he was telling the truth, he said, 100%. Nicholas Foreman sent several Instagram messages to others in the days that followed. She got jumped by 3 girls really badly and she died before I could get her to the hospital, Foreman wrote in one message. He was sticking to his story. They began to look for the group of girls who had jumped Sabrina. Pretty quickly though, authorities realised these females didn't actually exist. Video surveillance footage from PJ Wellaghan's pub showed no evidence of Sabrina ever having an altercation with 3 women. In fact, the CCTV showed no evidence of Sabrina getting into an altercation with anyone at all. It actually showed a happy couple having a nice date night. There was nothing out of the ordinary. They were really happy, they were polite, they were smiling, seemed like a happy couple, described Ashley Nicole Pearson, their server. This whole thing just didn't make sense. The police began to explore other options. All eyes turned to the boyfriend. Nicholas was acting strange. He was the last to see her. He also had previous convictions. Police then seized his cell phone as part of the investigation. No one anticipated what they would find. It broke this case wide open. Detectives uncovered a 13-second video recording on his cell phone. The video was of Sabrina with blood on her face, lying on the grass area outside of Nicholas's residence. In the recording, a male voice is heard stating, "This is what a cheating liar gets. You hear me? Cheating liar." 3 days after Sabrina's death, Nicholas was arrested. On Thursday, the 6th of February 2020, he was charged with first and third-degree murder. Upon arrest, he acted as though he was in disbelief. Continuing to peddle his story about the fight, he angrily told reporters,
Why did you do it? Who did? 3 girls. Yeah, this is crazy.
but no one believed him. Very quickly, the police had pieced together what really happened on that fateful night. After watching the Super Bowl at PJ Wellaghan's bar, the couple took an Uber home. In the car, Sabrina made a reference to receiving a text message from an ex-boyfriend. It was just a joke, a passing remark, but it irked Nicholas, who became increasingly agitated. Nicholas Foreman was jealous. He was angry. The thought of Sabrina texting an ex-boyfriend to him was completely unbearable. He demanded to see her phone. He wanted to see the text. She just tried to dismiss it. She kept trying to dismiss it, explained the Uber driver. When Sabrina refused, Nicholas told her that she couldn't come home with him until she showed him the phone. Sabrina didn't know how to respond, telling him to cut it out, "You're scaring me." As he got angrier and more irate, the Uber arrived at Nicholas's place and the two got out, but Nicholas wasn't ready to let it go just yet. They continued to argue in the driveway. The Uber driver was concerned and hung around. There was yelling in the driveway and maybe a flailing of the arms, and there was arguing going on. "I heard the sound of something breaking," the Uber driver explained. Not wanting to leave, he pulled over and waited 10 minutes or so until the shouting stopped. And it did. So the Uber driver left. But for Sabrina, the nightmare was only just beginning. After the argument, Nicholas Foreman attacked Sabrina. It wasn't a group of women. She was jumped by her own boyfriend. A witness named Brady Reese said that he had seen Sabrina stumbling and appearing to say help, but Nicholas insisted that she was just drunk. He said Sabrina gave a thumbs up and the two walked away. Nicholas continued a sustained attack before ending her life as she lay helpless on the grass. The autopsy determined that Sabrina passed from asphyxia, strangulation and multiple blunt force injuries. As she lay motionless, he used his cell phone to take the video that was key to his arrest. He then dragged her body into his home, leaving marks across the yard. Her bracelet, plastic beaded letters that spelt out Sabrina, was found in the yard. The evidence was damning. Nicholas's vital fluids was found on Sabrina's denim jacket and Sabrina's was found on his. He didn't cover his tracks, not at all. In fact, in an act that showed his coldness and contempt for Sabrina, after dragging her inside, Nicholas went outside and sat in the car of an ex-girlfriend. Meanwhile, Sabrina Harouni fought for her life just meters away inside his home. If she had received medical attention straight away, there is a chance that she may have survived. But But instead of taking her to the hospital, he sat with another woman for an hour. They talked. They kissed. Nicholas posted on Snapchat. He then went inside and went to sleep. He seemingly never even considered getting help for Sabrina.
I had never heard of his name until we heard that he was arrested.
It's just sad, man. You know, that a young kid like that, and you know, so it's so brutal. It's like, why?
On the 19th of August 2021, Nicholas Foreman went on trial at Montgomery County Court. He was tried for first and third degree murder. First degree, which was intentional, carries a sentence of life imprisonment. Third degree, which is an attack without intent, is 20 to 40 years in prison. The prosecutors argued that Nicholas had many chances to get help for Sabrina, but didn't. This is a specific intent to kill in this case because he did not seek medical treatment for her. Instead, he hid her away so nobody could help her. The words of DA Kevin Steele, and he continued, each of these acts that put her in that condition is a deliberate act, hitting, compression, choking, or deliberate action.
Sabrina's not here to tell us the truth. And they're taking what this monster said and spreading it. And they just ask for respect of Sabrina. She was an angel on earth, and now she's an angel for us, watching over us. Your light will never be dimmed until we meet again.
Defense lawyer Michael A. John sought a mistrial due to emotional outbursts in court. As the key cell phone footage was played in the court, Sabrina's mother, Rabia, had shouted, "How could you do that to my baby?" But the mistrial was denied by Judge William R. Carpenter. The judge simply cautioned jurors not to let their emotions or sympathy impact their deliberations. But they didn't need their emotions or sympathy to make the right decision. The evidence here said it all. The jury took just 90 minutes to come to a decision. They found him guilty of first-degree murder. He asked to be sentenced immediately. On August the 19th, 2021, Nicholas Foreman was sentenced to life in prison. For some, love doesn't come easy. For others, it may just take a few tries. For the rare few, like Nathan and Denise Lee, they found love at first try, at first sight. Denise was born Denise Amber Goff on August 6, 1986, to Sergeant Rick Goff of the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office and his wife, Sue. Nathan and Denise met during their senior year of high school at Lemon Bay High in Englewood, Florida. Denise, an introvert by all accounts, was quiet but extremely smart. She was the ideal student. Nathan, the opposite, a loud, outgoing jock. The two had their first date about 3 weeks before Valentine's Day 2004, and as a gift that I imagine was quite awkward but also very sweet nonetheless, Nathan had bought Denise a $40 heart-shaped ring. For Denise, it was not the price but the intention. The two began a whirlwind romance. They graduated that year, Denise with honours, and roughly a year after, they got married. Before long, Denise was pregnant. Foregoing a college degree, she decided to raise their new child, Noah. Soon enough, another new life would follow, this time named Adam. When the economy collapsed across the nation around 2008, the couple moved to Northport for affordable housing, and they felt that they now had it all. Northport had originally functioned as a subsidiary of the city of Charlotte. Eventually, though, it prospered into a city all of its own. This was a perfect definition of American suburban life. The couple was happy, content. Nathan was working 3 jobs to keep the household afloat. But through it all, they had their family, their home, and their love. She was perfect, Nathan Lee stated, with a warm smile growing across his face. When describing the day that a quiet, young Denise approached him and asked him out on a date, Nathan grinned again, saying, "Man, I should have just known it right there. She's the one." On January the 17th, days before the anniversary of their very first date, Nathan left for work that morning like he would any other day. On his lunch break, Nathan called home to check on his loving wife and kids. He mentioned to Denise to open the windows to try and save some money on air conditioning. Kindred spirits as always, she told her husband that she already had. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, Nathan got off work from his job reading electrical meters. He called his wife to let her know that he'd be home shortly. Oddly enough, though, there was no answer. On his 25-minute drive home, Nathan called his wife 8 times, failing to reach her with each and every one. But as he turned onto the street where their home was located, a fear washed over him. The windows that he had specifically discussed with his wife were now shut. The weather was warm and stuffy, and it was unlike her to have shut them. He entered the house and found something even more peculiar. His baby boys, Noah and Adam, together in a single crib, with his wife nowhere to be found. As he searched around the house, Nathan noticed the windows had been shut hastily, not latched or locked. Denise wouldn't have done any of this. Nathan began to feel overwhelmed as pieces of a disturbing puzzle fell into place. Perhaps most telling of all, he noticed his wife's cell phone and keys laying on a chair, things he knew she would have taken with her. Now panicked, Nathan made a call to 911.
Transport emergency?
Yes, I'm at 7912 Torre Avenue. I just got home from work and my wife, I can't find her. My kids were in the house and I don't know where she is. I've looked every single place.
When operators confirmed they would dispatch a unit, Nathan hung up. He then immediately called Denise's father, Detective Rick Goff, to inform him that his daughter was missing. Sergeant Goff sprang into action, his worst fears now recognised. He called his superiors and enlisted their support. He knew firsthand that missing persons cases reported by spouses can be dismissed until it's too late. Meanwhile, Detective Chris Morales of the Northport Police Department had responded to the missing persons call concerning Denise. His initial inquiry at the home hadn't turned up much. In fact, nothing seemed out of place at all. That is, except for the absence of Denise Amber Lee. At the behest of her father, law enforcement began to canvass the neighborhood, and soon after, if nothing else, they now had a lead to follow. Shortly before Nathan ended his workday, Jennifer Eckhart, a neighbor of the Lees, noticed a green Camaro creeping up and down the street repeatedly. She walked outside, wondering if perhaps the person in the car was lost. She then watched the car pull into the Lee's driveway. Roughly 10 minutes later, she watched the car leave the residence, though she did not see Denise in the car.
I came outside and we sat there for like 15 minutes. And so I went back inside, and then about 10 minutes later he left.
The police leapt into action. Helicopters circled the neighborhood and several law enforcement agencies committed to assisting with the investigation. Police now knew an unidentified man had been seen at the Lee residence, and after that, Denise Amber Lee was nowhere to be found. But at 6:14 p.m., Nathan Lee and Rick Goff's suspicions were confirmed when 911 operators received a grim call. It was Denise. She was still alive. She was doing whatever she needed to survive and get home to her family. Somehow she had managed to steal her abductor's cell phone and dial 911. This is an excerpt of that call. Over the course of the 7-minute phone call, Denise hid the phone from the captor, all while answering the dispatcher's questions by pretending to have a conversation with the man. Just a note from me, I think Denise showed incredible composure and resolve here. We can only hope that we would have a fraction of the strength and calm that she showed should we ever find ourselves in a situation like this. But back to the case. Suddenly, the line went dead. Frustratingly, law enforcement had not been able to trace the call. The phone that was used was just a cheap model. This means it did not have the required GPS equipment that police would use for precise tracking. All that they could confirm was that the phone was still in Northport, and the name of the man that the phone was registered to. He was Michael Lee King. King was 36 years old, originally from Michigan. As a child, he was identified as a special education student, and by the age of 8, he could not write all the letters of the alphabet. That being said, for the most part, King had a successful career as a plumber and was a dedicated husband and father. King had recently returned to Northport from Michigan in an attempt to redeem a house he owned from foreclosure. At this time, he was unemployed. 2 minutes after 911 operators had been disconnected from Denise Amber Lee, they received another call, this time from a relative of Michael Lee King. Sabrina Muxlow, the daughter of King's cousin, Harold Muxlow, had called to report some suspicious circumstances concerning King. She told them that King had shown up at her father's house between 5:30 and 6 p.m. He was looking to borrow a flashlight, a gas can, and a shovel, telling the elder Muxlow he had gotten his lawnmower stuck whilst mowing his lawn. Thinking nothing of it, Harold rounded up the items King had asked for and handed them over. He was walking back to his home from the front yard when he heard a female voice yell, "Call the cops." A voice now believed to be Denise Amber Lee from inside the car. Harold Muxlow turned about and began to walk towards King's car, which was parked on the side of the road. He asked his cousin what he was doing, and King lifted his head from beside the passenger side and replied, "Nothing, don't worry about it." He began to walk back to the house once again, but after giving one last glance back, saw his cousin climbing over the center console, then pushing down the head of someone with shoulder-length hair in the back seat. Something clearly wasn't right, so Muxlow drove to King's home. But King wasn't there, and neither was a lawnmower he had claimed was stuck. Harold Muxlow then called 911 and reported anonymously that a green Camaro may have someone trapped against their will.
911, what's the location of your emergency?
I'm not sure exactly what the emergency is exactly, but I think there's somebody that's working without don't want to be where they need to be. And they're in a 95 green Camaro from Northport.
Okay, how do you know this?
I know.
But when he told his daughter about the strange incident, she knew that she too had to report King to the authorities.
And the girl came out of got out of the car, and my dad's cousin went and put her back in the car when she got out.
Okay, where's your dad's house?
It's in Northport.
Where would he be going with this female?
He came over to my dad's house, borrowed a shovel, a gas tank, and something else.
Okay, we've been looking for this female. You are just so wonderful to call us and give us this information. Okay.
Yeah.
Within seconds after ending the call with Sabrina Muxlow, 911 operators received yet another call, this time from Jane Kowalski. She was in traffic and had reported hearing horrific, terrified screams from a car next to her.
The vehicle had a white male driver, and there was a child screaming in the car and banging on the window. I've got everybody hollering at me, and just 1 second.
He's going to turn left on Toledo Blade. He's turning left right now. Do you want me to turn? Try to follow him, or?
Okay, does he want her to follow him? Okay, can you turn?
Oh. He did turn on Toledo Blade. I don't know if I can catch up. There's a bunch of traffic and I can't get over.
The car was a Camaro. However, now in the dark, she described it as being blue or even black. She watched the driver push something down in the back seat. And as he did, a hand rose up from the back seat, pounding on the window. Kowalski attempted to hold back in the traffic in an effort to read the license plate of the car. However, the driver of the Camaro had refused to pull ahead of her. Eventually, it pulled off into a different street. The call had been made from Kowalski's cell phone just outside the Sarasota County line. This frustratingly meant the call had been routed to the 911 center in Charlotte County. In a moment of error, it was not instantly made available to authorities investigating the abduction of Denise Amber Lee. A costly mistake. At 6:42 p.m., police reached the residence of Michael Lee King, unaware, due to the error in the routing of the call, that he had just been sighted over the county line. Inside his home, they found duct tape, more specifically duct tape with long brown hair stuck to it. Long brown hair, just like Denise had. But they did not find either Denise or her captor. But then came a break in the investigation. At 9:16 p.m, now 7 hours after the initial sighting of King's Green Camaro in the Lee family driveway, State Trooper Edward Pope noticed a car matching the description pulling onto the I-75. He stopped the vehicle and drew his weapon, ordering the driver from the car. 4 times the driver ignored him, refused until finally Trooper Pope threatened to fire into the vehicle. Finally, a man emerged from the car. It was Michael Lee King. The suspect was wet from the waist down and covered in mud. His cell phone had the battery and SIM card removed, and a muddy shovel and a heart-shaped ring were found in the back seat. The heart-shaped ring. Investigators now had an obvious hunch. Knowing that King's cousin Harold Muxlow had seen a woman in the car with King earlier in the evening, police allowed Harold into the interrogation room, hoping to find out what had happened. But King had his own story to tell. According to him, both he and Denise had been kidnapped. He also said he had been blindfolded and had no idea what had happened to Denise. He went so far with his story as to take police officers to an area he told them he himself was kidnapped from. But unsurprisingly, this area turned up nothing. Police were thoroughly unconvinced, to say the least. They charged Michael Lee King in the abduction of Denise Amber Lee. Over the next 2 days, a massive search canvassed Northport and surrounding areas. Multiple law enforcement agencies were now working together to try to bring Denise home. Howie Grace, a photojournalist with the local NBC station and a family friend of the Goffs, later described the scene. "It started the moment I got off the interstate. They were visually searching with flashlights in the cars and stopping everybody or anybody who looked suspicious," he said. Rick Goff himself said they came out of the woodwork to help him and his family. "We're hoping she's alive." The next day, January the 18th, someone involved with the search noticed an area of disturbed earth in a marshy field, with what appeared to be drops of a red substance scattering the sand around the spot. On January the 19th, the forensics team excavated the area. There, 3 feet under the surface, they finally found Denise Amber Lee. King was then charged with taking the life of the beloved young mother. Several days later, police received a lab report. It contained confirmation of King's DNA being found both on and in Denise's body. King was then charged once again with having been forcibly intimate with Denise. Michael Lee King, however, would not reveal his dark secrets, and the case ultimately went to trial. Bolstered by the testimony of the witnesses from that fateful evening, along with DNA evidence and ballistics matches for shell casings King had fired at a firing range earlier in the day, jurors deliberated for just over 2 hours and unanimously found him guilty of kidnapping with intent to commit a felony, crimes of an intimate nature, and first-degree murder. Michael Lee King was sentenced to capital punishment for his crimes against Denise Amber Lee. King appealed the sentence, citing numerous reasons, but relying heavily on childhood brain damage as his excuse. A court eventually upheld the sentencing. Today, Michael Lee King awaits his final punishment from a prison cell in the Florida state penal system. Megan Newton was a shining star in her community in Stoke-on-Trent in the West Midlands. At just 18 years old, she had already accomplished more than many in her lifetime. With an unwavering dedication to academics, sport, and the community as a whole, she was also a well-rounded football player who stood out from the crowd. Her coach at Stoke Town Ladies said she loved life and she was a ball of energy, a force to be reckoned with, and a force she was. Her dreams were big, but she was determined to make them a reality. With her ambitious spirit and love for football, she dreamed about securing a scholarship to go and study in the United States. Her dream was to be the first of her family to go to university, and she intended to pursue a career in sports therapy. She had a genuine hunger for football coaching. She coached the Norton Wanderers under-7 side, and she was getting ready to undertake a Football Association coaching course. By all accounts, it seemed that Megan was well on her way to achieving her goals and ambitions. She was on course to leave a lasting impression on the world. But everything would change on the 19th of April 2019. It was a Friday, but not just a normal Friday. It was the start of the Easter weekend, and for 18-year-old Megan and her friends, that meant a bank holiday in the UK. Bank holidays in the UK are an excuse to go out with your friends and let your hair down. And this is exactly what Megan had every intention to do. Megan worked her shift at a local fish and chip shop in Trent Vale and finished just after 10 p.m. But the late shift wasn't about to stop her night out. She headed straight home to freshen up and change into something more clubbing appropriate. She met up with her friends at around 11:30 p.m. And as is the case with people of this age, for them, the night was still young, and the excitement was palpable. Megan and her friends hit the town first, stopping at a local bar to kick off the festivities. Glasses clinked and laughter filled the air as they toasted to the start of the Easter weekend. But the real festivities were just beginning. As the night went on and the party continued, the group made their way to a popular nightclub where they danced the night away. Megan was in high spirits, giggling, dancing, and proudly showing off her new tattoo. She was basking in the moment and living life to the fullest. The party eventually came to a halt at 2:20 a.m. Not by choice, the clubs were all closing. Megan said goodbye to her friends and made her way to a nearby taxi rank so that she could catch a cab back home. Little did she know that this seemingly routine journey home would become a fatal turning point in her life. When Megan got to the taxi rank, there was already a long queue as other partygoers all seemed to have the same idea as her. Everyone just wanted to get home. Knowing that her wait would be a long one, she braced herself for a tedious wait while standing in line. Waiting for a ride, Megan ran into Joseph Trevor, an old friend from school. Well, friend was a stretch, more like acquaintance. They saw each other out and about on nights out and would say hello. Their shared love for football often sparked conversation between the two. Joe, as he was more commonly known, also seemed to have a bright future ahead of him. He was a semi-professional footballer. He was the son of 2 police officers, and although his parents were strict, he had a normal upbringing and grew up in one of the most affluent parts of Stoke-on-Trent. He was in the process of studying for his A-levels, and he had already secured a scholarship to study at an American university. But it seems that, despite his promising future, his path was far from certain. Unlike Megan, he appeared to lack the drive and determination needed to succeed. He wasn't really willing to make the sacrifices needed to reach the very top. Despite his relatively comfortable life, he was prone to getting into trouble at school, and his illicit substance use was a constant source of concern. In fact, while standing in line with Megan that evening, he told her of the disastrous night that he'd had. He said that he was at the same nightclub as Megan and her friends, but he had been focusing on drinking excessively and indulging in illicit substances. It was at this nightclub that a bouncer caught him with a bag of ketamine, and this then resulted in a run-in with the police. Joe, however, was let off with a warning. He told Megan the last thing he wanted was to face his police officer parents at home while still under the influence. He told Megan that he was already in trouble with the police, and he didn't want to go home intoxicated and get into any more trouble with his parents. Desperate for a place to stay until he sobered up, Megan handed him her phone so that he could call some friends and find someone to help him out. However, none of his friends answered his calls. It seemed that Joe was now in a bit of a pickle. In a moment of compassion, she offered her couch as a refuge for the night, and Joe gratefully accepted. Little did she know that this act of kindness would spark a chain of events that would change everything. While in the cab on their way home, Joe actually received a text from his dad asking when he'd be returning home. At this point, Joe lied and said that he was staying over at a male friend's house. Megan and Joe are then seen walking on the side of the road on their way back to her flat. They eventually arrive at her apartment at around 4 a.m. Nothing seems to be out of the ordinary. They are quite jovial as Megan tries to unlock her front door. Joseph can be seen standing behind her. He takes a quick glance to his left and to his right, almost as though he was scouting his surroundings, checking to see if anyone spotted him arriving home with Meghan. Was this just a normal reaction, or was it an indication of the darkness that lay ahead? A few moments later, the door is unlocked and Meghan enters her apartment, with Joe following closely behind. This is the last time that Meghan is seen alive. On the morning of the 20th of April 2020, another resident at Meghan's apartment building made a gruesome discovery. Whilst taking out the trash, they found Meghan's apartment key and fob, stained with a reddy brown substance. In their building, you couldn't get in or out without a fob. If Meghan's fob was in the trash, where was she? Alarmed by the sight, they raced to Meghan's door. They pounded at it with urgency, desperate for a response. When the neighbours heard nothing back, they used the stained keys to gain access to the flat. There they were greeted with an even more gruesome discovery. The apartment was eerily quiet. In Meghan's bedroom, they were confronted with an horrific image. She lay lifeless and unclothed on her bed. The multiple visible wounds suggested this wasn't an accident. Someone had ended the life of Meghan Newton. When police arrived to investigate, they noted that there were no signs of forced entry. Meghan must have known the attacker. She would have had to have let them in herself. And once she did, she was throttled, intimately violated, and jabbed a total of 9 times in her neck and back with a sharp implement from her own kitchen. Police immediately turned to the CCTV footage from her building. At first, it appears to be just a young couple coming home after a night of fun, but what lies beneath the surface is shrouded in darkness and deceit. As she fumbles her key and gleefully makes her way into her flat, she's closely followed by Joseph Trevor. Their mood appears to be happy and nothing is out of the ordinary. The two are seen entering the apartment shortly after 4 a.m. And then, less than 90 minutes later, Joseph is seen leaving the flat again. But this time, he's alone. His demeanour is calm and he appears relaxed. He's then seen exiting her apartment building and strolling through the parking lot. He goes to the nearby bins where he discards Meghan's apartment key before leaving her complex. Footage from a nearby camera captures Joseph as he's walking down the street. At some point, he turns his hand to look at it, and the camera captures him with blood on his hand. Joseph here was quite literally caught red-handed. Joseph Trevor walked for another 15 minutes towards a bridge over the A500. This is a major dual carriageway in Stoke. Here he sits down at the edge of the bridge with his feet hanging over the road below. We can only guess the thoughts running through his head at this time. Was he reliving the last hour? Was he thinking about what had occurred within those 4 walls? Was he thinking about how he had thrown his scholarship, his life, away? He wasn't there long before catching the attention of a driver passing by. Alerted by the sight, the driver notified the authorities, who immediately rushed to the scene. The police apprehended Joseph and took him to the Hartlands Hospital to evaluate his mental state. They were determined to keep him from harm. After concluding that he was not a danger to himself, they called his father to take him home. Little did they know, they were releasing a cold-blooded killer. After reviewing the CCTV footage, police rushed to Joseph's home and brought him in for questioning. The evidence was already, frankly, damning. They just needed a confession. But that wasn't what they got. Joseph admitted to the police that he had been with Meghan the previous evening, and he told them that they were consensually intimate before his memory went blank. He said that he didn't remember what happened after their relations, but that he was 100% certain that he hadn't attacked Meghan. He wasn't a killer, he knew that much. But CCTV suggested otherwise. The police arrested Joseph Trevor for the killing of Meghan Newton on the same day. Despite the mountain of evidence against him, Joseph Trevor remained steadfast in his claim of innocence. He intended to plead not guilty, forcing Meghan's grieving parents to endure a full trial and prolong their suffering. After 10 months of gathering evidence, the state was ready to bring him to trial. They believed that he was responsible for the heinous crime involving Megan. Before proceedings could even begin, Joseph stood up in court. He shocked everyone in the room by declaring his guilt. The once defiant defendant now stood before the court ready to tell his version of events. He told the court that when he was 15 years old, he was accused of violating a 14-year-old girl. There were no charges and the matter never even went to trial, but the stigma followed him for years. He was bullied at school, nicknamed Pig and Rolf Harris. By the way, just Google it at your discretion if you're not from the UK. And on the night of the crime, he ran into Megan in a taxi rank. The two had a brief conversation and Megan apologized to him. She told him that she was the one responsible for spreading these rumors around the school. He said that when Megan admitted this to him, it had brought up old demons, and it was ultimately this admission that drove him to murder. The prosecution, on the other hand, didn't believe a word of Joseph's version of events. There was nothing in Megan's character that suggested she would start those rumors. She had always been nice to him. The prosecution argued he wasn't triggered by a confession, but instead by rejection. They argued that when Megan invited Joe back to her place, it was purely platonic. She was being nice and he was in a sticky situation. He was having a bad night and he had nowhere else to go. Joseph's motives for going back to her place were for intimate relations, and he most likely tried to come onto her when they got back to her flat. When she rejected him, Joseph flew into a fit of rage. Joseph was used to getting what he wanted, but he couldn't have Megan. When she said no, he ended up throttling her for 15 to 30 seconds, and he ultimately jabbed at her with a sharp implement. This case was surely black and white. The judge agreed. He stated, "The attack on her was driven and motivated by your serious and violent conduct. You violated her. You went on to strangle her. You went on to arm yourself with an implement from the kitchen area and jabbed her no less than 9 times. There was no question of whether or not he was guilty, only of what his punishment would be." Joseph Trevor was sentenced to a minimum of 21 years and 65 days in jail before he could then be considered for parole. This means that he may be back out on the streets by the time he turns 40, a fact that Megan's parents find difficult to digest.